Hey developers, today we're going to look at MongoDB Atlas. We're going to create a GraphQL application that saves information to your MongoDB Atlas. So we're going to take a look at a really cool Node app. We're going to create basically an API, as you can see here. I have Playground running on the app that we're going to create. We can do queries, we can do mutations, and it all gets saved in the cloud in MongoDB Atlas, which is really simple, easy to use. By the way, it's absolutely 100% for free to try out. I'll put a link in the description so you guys can sign up and get your free MongoDB Atlas. So let's begin. Hey, and if you don't know, my name is Eric. I'm a full-stack software developer with several years of software development experience. And this channel has a bunch of information for new developers, intermediate developers on all your favorite JavaScript frameworks, and also, like in this video, stuff about the back end. And if you're not familiar with MongoDB, basically you can store like data, flexible data in JSON-like documents. So it can be really quick to retrieve information. Then you have this what's called a document model. So you map it maps to the objects in your application code. So it makes it really easy to work with. So you can do ad hoc indexing and querying really easily. And MongoDB is a distributed database at its core. So it has high availability, horizontal scaling. Its geographical distributions are built in, and it's so easy to use. And that's part of why when you use MongoDB Atlas, it does everything for you, and it's a great development database that you guys can use. Let's take a look at the MongoDB website and see how we can get started. I'll put a link to this in the description below. Make sure you click on it. It's absolutely for free to get started, and it's pretty cool. So this is a way we can run MongoDB in the cloud. We can run it on Azure, AWS, or the Google Cloud platform. It's really simple to use. To get started, you just need to click the Start Free or the Try Free at the top, and then fill out your account information, and we'll get started here. So once it creates the MongoDB Atlas account here, after you enter user information, it's going to ask you a few questions. First, it's going to welcome you. You can use our Atlas, means you won't have to worry about installing, configuring, and manage your database anymore. And so we'll click Build our new cluster here. And so it'll ask us some more learning questions. We can click Learning MongoDB, developing a new app, migrating existing app. So if we click Learning MongoDB, it gives you these little prompts to kind of explain what to do. So for example, it says here, give your cluster a name. So we'll click on it here. We'll call it Erik Cluster. And then all the other settings are defaulted here, but essentially what it's creating, it's creating it on the AWS platform. It's using this North Virginia recommended free tier available. It's using the basic 512 megs of RAM storage and MongoDB with no backup. And if that all looks good, and by the way, it is free forever, then you just click the Create Cluster here, and it'll go ahead and start creating the cluster. It could take up to 7 to 10 minutes to provision, so we'll just wait a second. Okay, so it went ahead and created the cluster for us. And you can now take a look at it. So first thing we can do is click Collections here. And we can go ahead and, just for the heck of it, we can either add our own data or we can load sample data set. So let's load a sample data set. It's about 350 megs. And we click on it here, and it will show us what information about the sample data set. But it has the sample Airbnb, geospatial, and it kind of tells you what's in it, gives you an idea. But for what we're doing, we're just going to go ahead and just load it. So I'm going to load the sample data set, and it will load it in, and we can take a look at it. Okay, I went ahead and added in all the sample data, and we can kind of take a look at it here. Here is the fields we have. You see it's one of 20 of many. And we can put filters in here and do some things. We can look at the geospatial data. We see it has 11,000 documents in here. Kind of get an idea of what it looks like. We have these ID of the record, vessel items. Cool, so we have this all in here. And you can run filters and requests you can see there's command line tools that you can install. Just close this. You can, it kind of gives you some instructions of how to connect to it. Collections is where we just are, where we showed everything we just imported in. We can also create a new database. We can look at metrics to see how many people have been connecting. We can add some filters too. We have real-time analytics, but you have to have a higher, more, you have to pay for it, it looks like. And the overview, actually what it says here is you have to upgrade your cluster. Yep. So you have a different cluster. And it tells you what the last thing we did. We just updated the sample data set. We can see the region and how much space we're using. So that's all good there. We can go into connect and we can have, this is where we can add a user. So first we can add our current IP address, which is a good idea. So the way it works is that you basically can't connect unless you whitelist the IP address that you're connecting from. So we'll go ahead and do that there. And then we can create a MongoDB user. So I can create like Bravo 1, and then I'll put in a password. And we'll just create MongoDB user. And basically it tells you whitelist your IP, connect to the cluster. Won't worry about that right now. And then we can see choose a connection method. So connect with the Mongo shell, connect your application. So this is really handy right here. You connect your application, it actually gives you the command string only of how to connect, or it gives you the whole basically node connection string that you can use, which is really handy. So we're gonna, in our, a little bit later in this video, I'll show you how we can use the connection string and connect in our application. You can see here you can use version 3.0 or later. You can also get examples for C, C++, C#, Python, Ruby, everything you need. So if this all looks good, we'll go back here. Cannot connect yet. Set up your file access to first setup. Set up your firewall. So we'll add our current IP, add IP address. It's great. You're ready to connect. Choosing you want to connect. We whitelisted everything, created a MongoDB user. Everything looks okay, so we should be able to click close. And if we click connect again, we can say we're going to use connect our application, and we can try that later to make sure it works. In addition, on this dashboard, we have alerts. So this kind of tells us like our cluster was created, a bunch of information about what we just did. We have our backup, so we can see if we have backups. Since we're using the free plan, we don't have any backups. We can see our access, the owners, everything we set up there. And then settings, where we, this is some settings on our project, like how we're connecting, statistics, Explorer. Then there's something called Stitch application, build your application Stitch, our backend as a service. This, I haven't tested this out. This is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but you guys can check this out. Then you get more charts, which is in beta, which I want to activate right now. And you can always go with docs, and they have pretty good support too. So that's how you set up your MongoDB. Just a simple overview how you set up your MongoDB Atlas. Okay, now since we have everything set up, let's go ahead and create an app. And so we're going to create an app where we're going to use GraphQL. We're going to use our MongoDB database on Atlas, and we'll put it all together. So we're going to create a really, really basic GraphQL server using Node here. So just I have Node, I think I have Node 10 running. You can certainly run Node 12 or whatever version Node you want. And if you don't know how to install Node, I would just Google those instructions for Node. So first I'm going to run an npm init. And it's just going to ask me some questions. I'm just going to hit enter all the way through. And that's going to give me our package.json file you can see here. And then I'm going to install some dependencies. And you can certainly do this with Yarn too. But first I want to install, we're going to use Babel or Babel, depending on you guys like to, depending on how you pronounce it. So we're going to install Babel core, Babel CLI, Babel node, and then Babel preset env. And then I'm going to push, actually we'll do one more. We'll do nodemon so we can run it, so detect changes. And then we'll install all those as development dependencies. So I'll push -D at the end. Oops, I had one typo here. This is supposed to be Babel / preset env. And we'll just do that. Okay, great. It installed everything. Now, if you're wondering why I installed those libraries, I'm pretty much just, if you go to the Babel website and just kind of put in the tools that you want, you'll get the same thing. This is just so we can get started pretty quickly. Now, what we want to do now is install a few more packages. So you can also double check. We can look at the package.json file and look at the dev dependencies and make sure that they're all there. Looks good. And now for our dependencies, we're going to npm install just a few of these. So we're going to install Apollo Server Express. We're going to install Express, GraphQL, of course, and Mongoose, which was what we're going to use to connect to our Atlas MongoDB. So this will just take a second. Oh, so I accidentally did something silly here. I named my project GraphQL, and I can't have it the same name as the package, of course. So I'm going to put a dash here and call it example. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to try to run that command again. So let's take a second. Okay, great. Everything's installed. Now, if you look in our package.json file, you can see it has the dependencies. It automatically does that. If you are on I think over node 7 or higher, it automatically adds it to your dependencies, so you don't have to enter that manually in, which is perfect. Now we want to set up a few folders here. So I have my node module, so I'm going to create a few folders. First, I'm going to create a source folder. That's where we're going to create my source. And then inside my source folder, I'll create a new folder called models. By the way, I could have just done inside Visual Studio Code, you can just like make multiple directories like this. I can just have done like that, but just for simplicity's sake, I'll just do one at a time. And yeah, I think that's all I want to do so far. So I have the source folder and the models folder. Now, in this package.json file, I can, what might be prudent is to use nodemon. So first, let me create one more file. So part of Babel's config, we need to create a Babel RC file. And then inside that Babel RC file, we're just going to add this presets object. So it kind of looks like this. I'm just going to put in presets. And then inside here, I'm going to add in @ and then preset -env. That's just something that you have to add in for Babel. And then also I'm going to, actually I think that's it for that. Oh yeah, inside my package.json file, we can create a script. So I can create my own scripts here that makes it a little bit easier to run things. So I can create a start script. And then in my start script, I'm going to do nodemon -- exec. And then I'm going to run this Babel node, and then it's going to run our index.js file. And I'll show you why we were doing that in a second. So now nodemon is like a node server that detects changes. This Babel node, if you look in our package.json file, it's this right here. This is like a command line tool to compile Babel. So normally what you would do is you would set some kind of script in here and run some Babel command to compile it, and you would create like a dist folder. So what Babel does is you can take, ES6 or ES7 code, and it will convert it over to like ES5 or something that's compatible. In this case with Node, it would be able to convert, if we're using like ES6 module imports, which I want to use, it'll convert it over so Node, this version Node will understand it. So if you're watching this in the future or you're watching this now, you may have realized that Node 12 just came out, or officially came out. So if you look, there was just a press release, or I guess a release on it recently from the Node Foundation. In fact, it's right here. And one of the things Node 12 brought to us is that it has built-in ES6 module support, making native modules easier. So if we were running Node 12, we can use node modules, so use the import syntax instead of having to use require. However, I believe even with Node 12, you still have to use some experimental flag to turn it on. And so just for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to use Node 12 and use that flag, but we're going to use Babel just to make sure it works. I'll include a link to that article in the description. All right, so let's see if this works. So we'll save it here, of course. And then in our source folder, not our node, source, we'll create our file index.js. And we'll make sure that's in the source folder. Yep, it's in the source folder. And we could do this a couple of ways. So let's just import a couple things. Let's import Express from Express. And by the way, I'll include the link for these files in a GitHub at the bottom. We'll import Mongoose from Mongoose. And we'll create a server here. So I want to create a server. Server. We'll use async and await, because why not? And then at the bottom, we'll just call our server. And if we want to create an app, we'll do const app express, since we're using Express here. And we won't, right now, we are not going to create the GraphQL right this second. I just want to make sure this works. So I'll do app.listen. I think we do port 4000 here. Well, let's do 4001. And then from here, we'll just console log connected, just to see what happens. And down here, we'll go ahead and run it. So npm run start. So now it's running. It says connected. So it looks like in 4001, port 4001, if we just open up our browser and we open up localhost, which I'll do on a different screen here, and I'll bring it over. 4001. We obviously don't have anything, but we don't get an error that it can't even connect, so that's good. We could, of course, have it return something. So if we do app.get, I don't know. Oops. We do app.get, and we get from here. We have request and response object. And let's do this. Request response. And then we send, I don't know, hello world. Okay, we'll save it. And now if we go into our server here and refresh it, now we get hello world. So we know our Express server is working, which is a good thing. Okay, so now we have an Express server. It doesn't do too much, but it works. So let's see if we can add the GraphQL part. So what I like to do here is I'm going to create two files we're going to set up later. One's going to be called the resolver.js, and then the other one's going to be called typedefs. Now I'm not going to get into all the details of GraphQL. I'll save that for a different video. But basically this is where we're going to set the definitions and how to resolve those definitions. And then in the model, I'll create a new file called, I don't know, let's say we have our model is animals.js. We'll come back to that. And we'll be more specific. We'll call it dog.js. Okay, so in our index file here, we have this Express server. And what we want to do is up here, we're going to import our Apollo server. It's Apollo server, GQL, from the Apollo server Express. And then we're also going to import resolvers, which we will create in a little bit, from our resolvers, that folder we just created. And we'll also import in our type defs. And we'll do the same thing from type defs. And that's our type definitions. Sweet. Okay, so we have all those. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a new server here. And that's going to be a new Apollo server. Now, Apollo server is a library that we installed that basically lets us create the server, the GraphQL server. And the way it works is we have to give it an object, and that object will be the type definitions that we're setting up in the resolvers. And then we have to do this apply. We're going to get an error, by the way, but that's okay. Middleware. And we're going to pass it the app. And now we want to, before we get too much farther, let's just see if we can get the Apollo server working. So in my resolvers, well, let's create the type definitions first. So inside our type definitions, this is kind of defining the API that we're creating. So we're going to import GQL from the Apollo. And sometimes, I know I'm not consistent here. Sometimes I'm double quotes and sometimes I'm single. It doesn't really matter, but I should be consistent. I'll just put single here. And I'm going to export the const type. So since we were able to use ES6 exports, we can do it this way. And you can see this GQL, this is where we can use our GraphQL. And this is where we can structure the definition. So it looks kind of like this. So we're going to create just a really simple one called query. And then we're going to create a hello. We're going to define it as, well, we'll do a hello world. We'll define it as a string. And then, yeah, that's what we'll do for right now. And now we have to go to our resolvers, which is right here. And we'll do export const resolvers. And we're going to basically say what happens when you do this. So we're just going to hard code in hello world. And that's going to just return back. We'll do anonymous function here, or ES6 arrow function, and we'll just return hi. We'll return hello world. Perfect. So let's take a look. So our app crashed. So we have our resolver, we have our type def, and now our index. So let me just stop everything and restart it, and then I'll see what errors I get. So cannot find module resolvers. Oh, I put an S there, so we have resolver. Resolver. Let's save that. And we'll restart the server one more. Well, let's see what other errors we got. Can't find type defs. So we need a dot here. So I just had a couple typos, not too big. And it's restarting. Okay, connected. I didn't get any errors that time. So now what I should do is, well, there's one other thing. I need to expose where the GraphQL is going to run from. So I have this app.listen. Actually, let's see. It actually might be exposed. So let me bring over this. And to get to the playground, we'll just do / GraphQL. Cool. So here's our server we just created in port 4001. If we look at the schema, we have our hello world. It tells us all about it and what we can do. So we should be able to write our first query here. So if we hit control space, we can see we have the hello world here. And then we can say, well, we could just run it and see what it returns. Oops, I found one little error. So actually in our resolver here, if I go into our resolver, it's actually called resolvers. But inside here, I'm calling resolver. So let me make sure I'll just fix that to resolvers. And then I'll make sure I have resolvers there. I'll save it. You see it NodeMon reloaded as I expected. So I'm going to go bring back, I'm going to bring over my GraphQL here, and I actually already created a query here. Hello world. I hit play here, and you can see it's returning hello world as I expected. So we can see our GraphQL server is working, which is awesome. So now, since we have a GraphQL that's working, let's take the next step and create some sort of object that we can then use to save to our Mongoose and our Apollo server. So the easiest way to do that would be to create a Mongoose here. So if we can see here at the top, we have Mongoose. It's not being used. So right under this middleware, we could probably even separate this to a different file, but I'm not going to. I'm going to do a wait. I'm going to do a mongoose.connect. And I'm going to put a couple of, I'm going to put the connection string here in a second. And we can actually do one other thing, and that's, there's some options that you can do here, which there's an object here. So I'm going to use this use new URL parser and set that to true, since we'll be using that. Now this Mongoose connect, now we can paste, pretty much copy and paste the string that we used to connect to the database from when we set up Atlas. So I'm going to copy and paste that in here. And just for the sake of what we're doing, I'm going to use a password that I will change later. But for now, we will have this password. So I'll paste it in here from my other screen. Okay, I'll make sure I have endings there. Okay, and I don't want two of these. There we go. So this is it's asking for the password here. So I'm going to put in, this is the right connection screen. Yep. I'm gonna put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just for now. And I'm going to save it. And so what this is going to do is it's going to connect to my database. Now, right now, it's giving me an error, but I will fix that in a second. And also, I'm not, normally when you do awaits, a good rule of thumb is you can actually throw it in a try-catch block so you can see what happens. So if it has an error, you catch it. So you would do something like this. And then I put this in here, and then I would console log the error. This is probably a good practice to do. So I'll save it. And you can see here, it'll probably give me another error, but it says it's a bad authentication failed because I haven't changed the password yet. But that's good to know. So I'm going to, in my models, I'm going to, this is where I'm going to set up my dog model. And by the way, I did take some inspiration from this example from Ben Awad. He is another YouTuber, so shout outs to him. But I kind of changed it up a little bit, and of course we're using Atlas. So, but he has a lot of really cool GraphQL videos, so I would check that out if you guys are interested. So I'm going to do Mongoose, and then I'm going to export const. We'll call it dog. I'll do capital dog. And that's going to be mongoose.model dog. And that's going to be type string. And we'll need this later, so I'll show you. So this is basically the schema that I'm setting up for this Mongoose model. You can see here, defines a model, retrieves it. Models defined in the Mongoose instance are available to all connection created by the same Mongoose instance. So now I'm basically creating a dog model. And what I could do then is in my type defs, I'm going to create a new one. So type, we'll call it dog. It's going to have, we're going to have a dog here. And inside the dog, we're going to have an ID. and that means it's non-nullable. That's what that exclamation point means. And then I have a name, and we'll call it string. So we're gonna have a different dog with different names. And then in my dog here, in my resolver, this is like basically telling what you're gonna do with it, how you're gonna implement it. So let's do a query first. So I'm gonna put a comma. This is an object, of course. We'll call it, let's say dogs. And that's going to do the dog.find. And it automatically imported in there because it's smart, which is cool. So now we have this new type definition for dog, which we've created. Actually, what we could do, we created the definition for dog, but we didn't actually add it in here into the query. So we want to do dogs, and then we'll do dog, like that. And then we'll need to import, actually, that should be the only thing we need there. So we have the dog here, we're importing it in, and now we have the resolver that goes ahead and finds the dog based on what's passed in, which is perfect. And that's it. So if we go back to our playground, well, actually, let me off camera here. I'm going to go and fix the error that we're getting. Okay, looks like everything is connected now without any errors. So if I bring over the playground and I'll refresh it, you see if I click on the schema, you see now I have my dogs here. So I could do something like this. I could do dogs and hit the play button. If I do this right, hold on. And then inside the dogs, I would add in my ID and name. And then I'll hit play. And you see here I have an empty object being returned, which is good, but we actually don't have dogs set up at all. So we have an empty object, but we need to create it. So let's create a mutation. And to do that, we're going to go back to our type defs. And this is going to allow us for the API to create a record inside our MongoDB. So we're going to do create dog. We're going to pass in the name as string, non-nullable, and it's going to be a type dog, which is exactly what we want for this create dog. And then for the resolver, we're going to have to create the resolver. So it's going to be type mutation, and then inside the mutation we're going to have create dog. It's going to be async function. We're going to ignore the first one that comes through, and we're going to have a name here. And if you don't know what all this is basically, I'm not going to get too much in the details, but this is how we create a resolver. So we're essentially saying we're going to get the name that comes in, and then we're going to, let's create a puppy here, and it's going to be a new dog, and we're going to pass in the name that comes in there. Oops. If I can type here. And then we're going to await it. So we're going to wait until it resolves. And then we're going to do puppy.save. If I could type puppy.save. So this is basically Mongoose. We're saying we're grabbing the dog from the models, and then we're going to save it into the database. And then we have to return something, so we're going to return the puppy. Cool. So now we have everything we need to do this mutation. So we have the result. We have this new mutation set up. It's going to go into the dog model that we created earlier that creates the dog. We're going to essentially create a new dog. We're going to pass in the name that comes from the type definition that's sent over, and then we're going to save it. And that should save it into the database, to the Mongoose database that's hosted on Atlas. So let's see if we can put this all together and see if it works. So I'll bring over my playground again. So what we need to do now is do a mutation. So to do a mutation, you have to type in mutation. We're going to do create dog. So if we look at our schema, if we forget, we can see what it's called. So we do have these dogs here. Actually, I have to refresh here. See, now we have create dog. So that's what we want. So in our create dog, we know we have to pass in a name. So we'll pass in the name as, I don't know, rough. Terrible name for a dog, but hey, that works. And then inside here, it's giving me a syntax error, but we'll fix that. ID and name. And it's saying we need to have double quotes here, not single. So we need double quotes. Cool. So it's saying, okay, let's create a dog named Ruff, and we're going to return ID and name. So if we hit the play button, cool, it created our dog, Ruff. Looks good here. I can create Ruff, I don't know, 1. So now I have 2 dogs. And if I do my query on dogs, and I return the ID and name, it should return an array of dogs. Cool. So we see our 2 dogs here, ID and name. And if I go back to my, Atlas, which I'll bring over, I'll pull over here from my other page. Here's Atlas. If I go into my collections, here's the 2 dogs. So it definitely was created on the Atlas server, and we can do anything we want with it. So this is a really simple example of getting a GraphQL server up and running with MongoDB using Atlas. I think it's pretty neat. It's pretty easy to get up and running. Obviously, if you wanted to add in authentication, have a full featured backend, this would be a lot more work. And if we wanted to add this into our React or Vue or Angular project, there's tons of libraries to do that. We essentially would be making calls to that localhost 4001 and then passing in certain types of strings that could that would return back this information. So I think that I'm gonna leave it there. So make sure you guys like and subscribe to this video, and also make sure you sign up for MongoDB Atlas. And even if you don't have a super need right now for a database, it's amazing just to practice with. Try to get used to what MongoDB is and how you can create these key value pairs and everything, and how you can create a database and save information. It's great practice, and it's a lot of fun. So thanks again. Take care.